Hi, folks. Welcome back. So we will do a quick recap of how we ended the session last time. And like I said, I hope to start with the first chapter of the Bhagwad Gita. Actually, I was in two minds because there's a specific portion of symbolism that is key to understanding this. So whether to complete that and then go to this text or but I have decided that we will go through the text first. So we went over this, that the Pandavas, they asked for Indraprastha from Duryodhana, and then with the help of Krishna, Krishna goes as a messenger of peace, but Duryodhana just refuses, and any attempt at peace is it falls through. And so Duryodhana just says, nothing doing, there'll be war. And so it is that that it happens, and the war is inevitable. So this is one important incident that we want to be aware of, that took place prior to the war, because now they're getting the armies together to be prepared when the battle starts. So what happens is both Arjun and Duryodhan, they go to Krishna to seek his help in the battle. And so there is some long story about that. We are not going to get into too much of details. Krishna is sleeping, and Duryodhana happens to be sitting next to his head, whereas Arjuna is standing next to his feet. So when Krishna wakes up, he happens to see Arjuna first. And anyhow, what happens is Krishna says that I'm ready to help both of you, but the condition or the situation is this, that one of you can have me, just me. I will not actually partake in the warfare. I will not lift up any weapons. I will not fight with anyone. I will just be the charioteer of the whoever picks me. And on the other side, whoever wants can take my whole army. And it's supposed to be some divine army or something like that. And there's a lot that goes on in this story. And what ends up happening is Arjuna picks Sri Krishna, who plays the role of his charioteer in the battle, and Duryodhana goes with the mighty divine army of Sri Krishna. So this is a important thing to remember. All of this I've been saying from the beginning. There is a Vedantic implication why it is like that. Why does he not take part in the battle? Why is he just around? Because there's certain Vedantic concepts that are being superimposed on these characters, and you will clearly see why it is the way it is, why Krishna is saying that he's going to be like that. So now that it has been decided that war is going to take place, I hope you remember the divine sage. He comes to the palace and he says, he is obviously very disappointed with the way Dhritarashtra, the blind king, has managed the affairs. And he says, oh, blind king, I will give you the power of divine sight. It's like television of those times. He says, sitting here, you will be able to see everything that is happening in the battlefield. And it's kind of supposed to be a punishment of sorts, if you want to look at it, because most of the people know that whoever side Krishna is on, he is most likely going to win the battle, which means that many of the Kauravas, which is Dhritarashtra's sons, are going to get killed in the battlefield. And so really giving him vision is not necessarily a good thing. And here too, the symbolism comes into play. And actually, Dhritarashtra refuses. He says, I've been blind my whole life. I don't want vision right now at this point when I haven't even seen my kids when they were young and all that. Why would I want to see them when they'll be dying or they'll be dead? So he happens to he asks Vyasa that offer this divine vision onto Sanjaya, who is his charioteer. And so it is that the stage is set for this Bhagavad Gita. So Sanjay is the television guy, and he is giving a running commentary of what is happening. Whatever he sees, he narrates to the king. And there are times when the kings will ask him questions. There is some sort of dialogue that takes place. So this arrangement that is done is what starts off in the Bhagavad Gita. But the war itself is yet to happen. And the text of Mahabharat, just like you have chapters in a book, there is something called as parva in Mahabharata. So there are different parvas. So at this point in the story of Mahabharat, what starts off is called as the Bhishma Parva. So this Bhagavad Gita sits smack in the middle of this Bhishma Parva. I think it is Bhishma Parva's shloka number is 23 is what chapter 23 is when is where the Bhagavad Gita starts. So the Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters. This number 18 is kind of important. There are 18 chapters, 18 parvas, and there are 18 days of war. And then what happens, 13 day and 11 days. So this number 18 comes on and off in the narration and the story of the Mahabharata. Nevertheless, so that is where things are. And so this is kind of a very famous and popular picture. I do want to mention one thing, that I've taken many of these pictures from Google, and if somebody has any copyright things and wants me to say, I don't know who drew this picture, but if anybody wants to say, I need to mention his name somewhere, I don't have a problem. I'll just say whatever it is. So in this picture, you can see that on the one hand, there is the Kaurava army, and the other hand, the Pandavas. And so the clash is set. It's set to begin in this field of, it's in Kurukshetra. Kshetra itself is a field. Just to use the word, it's kind of repeating that. Nevertheless, so in this starting phase of this battle, one needs to understand what some of the questions could be here. And there are some very, very controversial and somewhat bothering questions that can come to one's mind. So here it is, a battle taking place. In modern day battles, you might decide on some day that both of the armies know, but really it's not that hard and fast. Secondly, when war starts, there's the negotiations wise, it's almost everything is done. There's nothing left to negotiate. So the scene here is that on this one side, there is the Kaurava army. On the other side, there is the Pandava army. And here in the middle of them both comes Sri Krishna on his chariot with Arjun, and they are discussing or Sri Krishna is telling Arjun this Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapters long. So one might ask the question, rightfully, what's happening to these other soldiers? Are they not? Are they just listening? They're just looking. They can't even hear. Maybe some of them can. Most of them can. Are they just sitting there and watching what's happening? This must be very confusing. So that is this question, and we will try and answer that question. There are several interpretations of this. We will look at a couple of them. The second thing that comes, that second question that might come to one's mind is that this whole Bhagwad Gita, the very word Gita, is in a form of poetry. So, it's a serious business. We are talking about a war here. People going to get killed and all that. Where is, how do you explain poetry coming in all that? So it gives you a hint that there is a lot of symbolism and there is a lot of superimposition of ideas and concepts going on. And we will try and understand some part of that too. And even with all that, there is still the notion that if there are some important takeaways that can help you in your life, one should really ignore such kind of somewhat less important questions. And one last thing I want to mention before I might actually end this and start with the actual reciting, that one may find extremely odd that for a religion that talks so much about non-violence and forgiveness, kshama and ahimsa, this whole setup, this whole scene is filled with such gore and violence that it's undone. I don't think there is any other religion that talks about warfare, fighting in such detail as part of their religion. And this talk of killing, and many times you will find that this talk of the death of near and dear ones, it's not even so much the enemy. And for a religion in general, religion as a philosophical thought, you would think it's supposed to propagate peace. What is this happening? What is this going on here? And so for that too, there are a few answers that we will see. And there is a great deal of symbolism that we are going to get into. We are, believe it or not, standing at the edge of a deep cliff, a precipice that is very, very deep. And one would have to take a plunge into that. And then we would begin to understand some of the things that are happening here. And we will do that after some time. So this is the point where the Bhagavad Gita starts. And what are we going to reference? And there are so many books available there. You can Google for Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit, and it's, I had mentioned before, it's written in Sanskrit. So there are several books that are there that one can go and look into on the web, Sanskrit and English. But there's a few that we are going to look at. So there is this site. It's got a very obvious name, Sanskrit documents.com. And here that the whole Gita is in Sanskrit. There isn't any translation or such. And I kind of like this version of it because there is a flow to it. When there is the translation that is there after each verse, it kind of breaks the continuity. So when we are actually reciting, and this I guess we'll be doing at the beginning of each chapter, I would like to take, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 verses, or maybe even the whole chapter. I will recite through. And then after that, subsequently, we will be looking at each verse. And then at that point, we'll bring in the translation. That is, so I have mentioned one of the translations, that a free translation that's available. Most of the time, I will do some translations on the fly. I will show how some of the sandhis have been broken up in the Sanskrit words. And the one point that I would like to mention here is that the whole Gita, if you were to recite, it takes about 2.5, 3 hours. And it's obviously good to know Sanskrit. That will help you in following what is happening. And when you want to memorize this, I don't want to say it's easy to memorize. It is not that easy. But one of the things that does help in memorizing is, once you begin to decipher the words and their meanings, it kind of becomes easy to memorize that verse. You have to understand the meaning behind the word. So it does help. If you spend, I don't know, about half an hour, 1 hour on 2 or 3 verses of the Bhagwad Gita every day, it might take you maybe a year or so to have this whole thing by heart. If you do it diligently, it has got its own plus points if you have it memorized. So it is, number one, it is there with you all the time. And then certain passages that are there, they are wonderful, and it just gives you a lot of contemplative food when you are able to go through it. So it's worth making an attempt if you care to memorize this. So that is why we will go through the Sanskrit docs the first time, and then we'll break it up. And then the English version that is there is, I just found it on the internet. Now we will look at some of the translation that he has provided. If there are places where I don't completely agree with what has been translated, then we'll break it up. I will provide my own translation and explain why I think whatever has been said is not exactly in line. So the problem is that the grammar that is there in English and the grammar that is there in Sanskrit, that kind of throws things off sometimes. And the other problem that is there is that because it is poetry, even in the Sanskrit that is being used in Bhagavad Gita, the words that get used in order to adhere to certain rules of poetry, they are so out of place that you have to kind of, pull one of them, push that into one place, break one of them, take its small part and push it to the end of the line, and then that makes sense. So that's why there can be certain variations of how somebody would do the translation. Most of the time, overall, it's going to be good. And as I said, some places where we find that there's too much of discrepancy, we will translate, we'll break the words ourselves and translate it as we see best. So having said that, I'm going to pause this video and then we will start reciting the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. A couple of small things that are there, that maybe I should have created a slide of this, but that's there'll be too many slides if I start getting at this level of detail. There is some words that if you know them would help you when we recite this. It's a word called vacha. Vacha means somebody saying something. And then there are different names. So there's Arjun Uach, that means Arjuna says. And then Sri Krishna and Arjun both actually. They have been referenced by several names. You know, Arjuna is Kapidwaja, Partha, and then Sri Krishna is sometimes called Madhusudan, Rishikesh. Arjuna is called Gudakesh. So it's there is some uh, synonymous that get used. Obviously, we'll be going through that in detail, but it will help if some of these things are known, and I will try and emphasize on them whenever we are going through this text. So I'm going to pause and then open this site, and then we will recite, or I will recite through this first chapter, and then before we start looking at it, we are going to again take a very big break, because we want to really plunge into some of the Vedantic Advaita concepts. So this first chapter makes a lot of sense. Now, I do want to say one thing, that most of the people may be aware of a name called Shankaracharya. This is a very, very important name in Hindu philosophy, Hindu religion, because he is one of those super geniuses who has explained some very, very complicated concepts that are in the Vedanta. So his commentary is regarded as an authority, final thing. And if somebody is interested, you might want to look it up. So there are a few other commentaries, and in general, this first chapter is somewhat ignored by most of these experts, but it has got a very valuable side to it. But that is why we are going to spend a lot of time on it. Generally, in some other Bhagwad Gita classes, you will find that the first chapter is not that, it's not looked into in that depth as one can, as we are going to be doing. And then actually, the 11th verse in the second chapter is when Sri Krishna starts talking. So you will find that even Shankaracharya, he practically says nothing about this first chapter. He starts from the second chapter. And some other texts also you will find like that. However, I think there is a lot of merit in us going through that. We'll be going through that. And after the first chapter, like I said, we are going to plunge into a lot of Vedantic discussions. So we understand really what is going on here. Otherwise, you will be at a loss. Why are they doing this? Who is doing this? Some of these things make no sense at all. And some of the characters, they are being so glorified by some people who don't exactly get the context of Bhagwad Gita. So we're going to see why that is the case. So I'm going to pause here, and then we'll start with the reciting. Thank you.